meet? How long have you been married for? And what was all the courtship like for you two?
We've been married for 50 years. I knew him long before we started dating. His father was headmaster of the elementary school I went to, and his younger sister was my...
That helps. That helps.
His younger sister was my bosom friend, so I was in and out of his home before I started dating him. So that's about 60 years ago, more.
Well, yes. I'll
You
tell
need
you.
more?
I'll tell you. I wanted to get married, but my family were not particularly impressed with my girlfriends, and I said, okay then. You don't think you like my choices? Who do you think I should? And my younger sister said, of course, my friend. And then I went up to her and I said, hey, how about me? And she really
So
played
that's the
hard to get, as usual.
So that's the courtship and the marriage. Does that answer your question? But there was also lobola, which thing many of you don't know, where you are asked to pay a bride price. Which they
Maybe
had
more
to-
like a dowry,
Yeah.
yes. Because our culture says it's not just the two individuals getting married. It's
families.
you and it's the two families, and so negotiations have to go on between the families. Originally, it was that there was an exchange of cattle, which in the traditional African culture represented considerable wealth, and you were saying that you want to some extent compensate the family of the bride, but it is also saying we are now coming together, not just of the two individuals, but it is we all coming together.
Archbishop Tutu, Madam, Brian Shamus, thank you again for the honor of your time. In your book, God Has a Dream, you speak that you have the verse, "Be still and know that I am God," and you speak about periods of meditation throughout the year. I wanted to know if that was a time of refuge for you or inspiration, and if you might expand on that idea a bit.
Yes, well, of course, our Lord has warned that you've got to be careful that you don't speak about what ought to be really a hidden part of your life. But it is, I went to a theological college, a seminary that was run by a religious community. And I was quite astounded. Part of the work that, as students, you had to do work, and they called it recreation. It was hard work, and I had to go and clean the father's chapel, that is the religious community's chapel, sweep out and polish the floor, and I was very struck by the fact that I'll go into the chapel outside of service times, and almost always you are going to find one or other of the community at prayer. And I got to realizing more by example than by precept that a deep spiritual life was quite indispensable for an authentic Christian existence. Praying, meditation, Bible reading, quiet days and retreats, that these were not sort of optional extras. They were integral to the life if you wanted. And you were also, I spoke about, well, I didn't say here, that one of the people who influenced me was Trevor Huddleston. And he was an activist. But his activism actually came out of his encounter with God. That was what made him get to do the kinds of things that he did. And so, one sought to emulate those examples that one had. And so absolutely crucial, central to one's existence would be all of the things that you've referred to.
Bishop, Archbishop Tutu, I'm behind you.
You are.
Yes, sir.
Hi.
How you doing? I'm Brandon Cole, and I'm from Montgomery, Alabama. And I was wondering, what are your ideas, or what were your ideas on the Black Power movement that took place in the United States during the 60s and 70s,
Yeah.
particularly with the ideas of revolution and by any means necessary?
Yeah. First of all, I would want to say that we were incredibly inspired by not just the civil rights movement. I was about 9 years of age when I picked up a tattered copy of Ebony magazine. And I don't know how it fell into my hands, but it was one that was describing how Jackie Robinson broke into Major League Baseball, playing for the Brooklyn Dodgers. Now, I didn't know baseball from ping pong, but what was so important for me was that here was a fellow black who, against enormous odds, had succeeded, and the inspiration that one got from that was quite phenomenal. And when you had the Brown Bomber and people like Sugar Ray Robinson, that all of those were people who inspired us enormously. And the civil rights movement had a very important impact on what was happening at home. We used to sing in some of our rallies. We used to sing "We Shall Overcome." We certainly understood the evolution of Black Power. In our instance, we were far more, I think, touched by the Black Consciousness movement, which was a very crucial thing. Steve Biko, possibly having been influenced by the developments in the United States, was the founder of the South African Black Consciousness movement, and it was important for us that this self-hate was exercised, and that we should get to believe that God did not make a mistake in creating us black. That we were not God's stepchildren, and that was important. That we got that, and there were some, I think, who were influenced by by what you might have called the radical element in the Black consciousness movement, seen as Black power. But we had to be careful at home. One, that we were not, because the apartheid government liked saying that we were the stooges of overseas manipulators, and it was important that we had to show that, I mean, whatever we did. We didn't have to wait for someone to come and tell us, hey, you have a toothache, and we suddenly say, oh yes, you say to them, do you think that I have to wait for someone up from outside to tell me about my condition? Yes. I mean, you must think that we really are stupid to have to wait to be told that what we are having here is an unfair dispensation. So we had also to be careful that we didn't allow the apartheid government to say, ah yes, they are engaging in subversive activity. That we had to keep working away at fighting against apartheid by saying we were involved and we were involved in a non-violent struggle.
Hi, my name's Alexis. I don't think I've ever been this nervous in my life. I can't believe I'm talking to you. But I was wondering what your thoughts and feelings on the Bush administration and Iraq war are.
Yes. I think that, like many other people, before the war, we said, and I said, we were in Florida. I was teaching at the University of North Florida at the time in Jacksonville. We said that a war that was declared unilaterally, not by a legitimate authority, as would be the case if it was declared by the United Nations Security Council, as the Bush administration itself conceded by first going to the Security Council, that if it was to be declared by an authority that was not legitimate, then it would be an immoral war. And we said that at the time. Many other people said it. I mean, the late Pope John Paul II, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and so many other people. And nothing that has happened since has changed that particular view. And as you know, I mean, there were millions of people who demonstrated right around the world to say that, no, give the inspectors, the UN inspectors, more time to find the so-called weapons of mass destruction. And one is sad, I mean, that we are landed with a particular situation now that is, well, a mess.
Hi, I'm over here.
Ah, yes.
Hi. My name's Bailey, and I'm from California, and I, too, am very, very nervous right now. But there's always been historically a group of people in most societies that has been shunned or discriminated against based on their gender or race or views. And currently, and most recently in the United States, I think that homosexuals would be that group. And our president uses his basis of his beliefs of his religion as a reason as to why homosexuals shouldn't have the same rights as many heterosexuals. And I was just wondering what your views are as a Christian on that subject, and also how it pertains to South Africa.
Yes. Perhaps the second part of your question first. Our Constitution outlaws discrimination based on almost everything, gender, disability, sexual orientation, culture, whatever. So in South Africa, it would be a criminal offense to discriminate against someone because of their sexual orientation. My own position, which is not necessarily the official position of our church, my own position is, I hope, consistent. I fought against apartheid because it was penalizing people for something about which they could do nothing, their ethnicity, skin color, or whatever. And I also opposed discrimination against women. In our church for a long time, we did not ordain women to the priesthood. And I said I couldn't just keep quiet. I couldn't, just as a matter of justice, not even theology, as a matter of justice, you couldn't tolerate a situation where people were being discriminated against about something for which they could do nothing, about which they could do nothing, their gender. And then we have this third category where I think almost all the evidence is pointing to the fact that sexual orientation is not a matter of choice. I mean, and if it was, you'd say, who are these crazies to choose a way of life that exposes them to so much, I mean, homophobia, violence, and I mean, even murder? That I would say myself that it is clearly a given. You don't choose to be gay, you don't choose to be lesbian, you don't choose to be whatever. And so for me, it's a fairly straightforward matter. I couldn't possibly keep quiet when people are discriminated against, injustices are leveled against them on the basis of something about which they can do nothing, their sexual orientation. And so I would, yeah, I know that in our Anglican church, it has become a burning issue. But I stand fairly squarely and solidly on the side of gays and lesbians, and I say that they're human beings and are entitled to all the rights of all human beings. And I would hope, Amen, that one day we will wake up and say, why were we so crazy for so long?
Archbishop Tutu, right here. I have to laugh because my question was almost identical to that. But I'm rephrasing it and I'll ask, but it's still on the same topic. A number of weeks ago, I read an article in which you were quoted on your thoughts of homophobia, where you described it as being as evil as the apartheid regime in South Africa. My question is, which I believe has already been answered, your thoughts on marriage for same-sex partners, and also, do you think there's any hope for equal in the United States?
When you're engaged in a campaign, I think sometimes you want to be smart, you know, and and be careful about your strategies. I think, I mean, that those seeking to legalize same-sex unions open themselves unnecessarily, I think, myself, to very considerable opposition by insisting on the name, the word marriage. And I think, I mean, I would say, if they came to me and said, what about tactics and strategy? I don't know, man, marry, leave that word out. And let's say same-sex unions. That, I mean, you've got everything you want except the name. I mean, why actually get to lose a battle? No, you will lose a war. A whole war, when perhaps, I mean, losing the battle over the name, that word. I would myself say so to that. I say, let's not I mean, it's a red rag to people. You know, marriage has been understood in a particular kind of way, and it's come down the ages, and it'll take long to get to people to change. So don't spend too much energy on that. Get the thing that you want.
Yeah, I'm right here. What's up? How you guys doing? My name's Matt, and I guess my question was, through everything that you've experienced in your life, all the tough times and things like that, and being a Christian, as I am myself, what area of Scripture, what passage was what you relied on when things were down and tough, and you're like, I can't do this anymore, like. I mean, it's going off in my head. It's not coming out. But when it's like, when things are tough and you're down, what is the passage of Scripture that has gotten you through that time? Yeah, that's all.
Well, yeah, of course, different ones, maybe different times. One that certainly we used a great deal in the South African Council of Churches was, if God be for us, who can be against us? You would say, man, these guys, they've already lost. They've already lost. They might have all the guns and the laws and whatever, but they've already lost. And we used to say, we are being nice to you white people in South Africa. We are inviting you, join the winning side, because we knew, I mean, there was no question about the fact that ultimately we were going to win, that justice was going to prevail. The question was when and how, not whether it was going to happen. And so that was one of the sort of key passages. If God before us, who can be against us?
One for me is always, you find in very many paths, do not be afraid. Jesus has said it so often, do not be afraid. And when I find myself in a quandary, it's usually because I'm afraid of upsetting people, or I'm afraid of what's going to happen to me. And that do not be afraid always gives me.
Hi, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your call for the UN Security Council to act on human rights violations in Burma, and if you could tell us a little bit about what you think about the government of Burma or Myanmar or whatever it is they're trying to call it.
Yeah.
And this part of the question might be a little heated, but what do you think about Burma being on the semester at sea itinerary?
Yes. You have heard, yeah? You heard, she was asking about Myanmar, Burma, and the fact that the former President Havel of the Czech Republic and myself have commissioned an international law firm to produce a report which we would hope would then be presented to the Security Council of the UN, urging the Security Council to take action against that unjust, oppressive regime in what they have renamed as Myanmar, Burma. And basically it is that Burma has had a checkered history, had a very short period of independence when the father of Aung San Suu Kyi, who is now under house arrest and has been under house arrest for 16 years or so, and is a Nobel Peace Laureate. Her father was assassinated, and you've had a number of coups. They had a military junta, which they still have, and in 1990, this they said, well, they wanted to hand over to a civilian government, and so had elections. Aung San Suu Kyi's party, the National League for Democracy, won over 80% of the votes. But the military, up to now, have refused to recognize the results of that election.